Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 31st year, I interview poets about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished, what they're planning for the future. We also have other brands of artists, or other brands of writers, I should say. We've had on novelists, short story writers, playwrights, and even other kinds of artists. We have had on sculptors, musicians, actors. It's a pretty broad net. So if you have an idea for a writer who might be a good guest for the Writer's Block or another brand of artist, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be glad to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming that comes out of 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television. That's not a public service you get with Dish. So you stay away from Dish, you stay with 1623. Tonight, I am very happy to say we do have a poet by the name of Rand Peabody. Rand, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Nice to be here, John. Thank you.
I'm very glad to have you with us because I know you've been very active on Cape Ann with a Poetry Salon. And I know also that your background is very, very interesting as a retired minister and a poet. So my first question, an easy question because you've lived the life, what coincided between your professional career as a minister and poetry, and where do they overlap in intellectually or emotionally or other ways I'm not thinking of?
Of course, as a minister, you're writing constantly sermons and all kinds of other teaching materials, all kinds of specific bulletin type of materials, but you don't get to do a lot of poetry typically as a pastor. And I found that for myself that it was really something that touches my soul. You know, the Bible says that we're created in the image of God. God says, let us make mankind in our image. Well, to me, if we're created in the image of a creator, then creativity is very innate within ourselves and souls.
Good point.
John Keats talked about creativity as soul making. So I don't think it's a far stretch from being a person who, with a career in professional religion and spirituality and counseling, to also be a poet.
So they merge in many areas.
I think they're coming out of the same place, yes.
I have a friend who is an ordained minister. She's also a social worker and also a well-published poet. And she loves balancing all three. I don't know which is most important to her. She's very, very busy, but she says the same thing, that they mesh.
Yeah, if we are watching our own experience both out there and within ourselves, we're certainly going to raise our awareness of who we are and who we are in the world and who we are within ourselves. If we take the time to write, and I might say I carry one of these little books in my pocket. This is my 108th such book in the last 20 years. And it's a diary book that I frequently fill with all kinds of what I call snapshot impressions or poetic impressions in day-to-day life. And yeah. I find in doing that, it really feeds me spiritually, and it also feeds me in terms of being able to share some of that with good friends.
You mentioned earlier that when we were talking about preparing for the show, the snapshots, and that you write them on a plane or in the car or wherever. Yeah. Can you share a couple of those with us and talk about where you were when you wrote them and how they evolved?
Yeah, for me, they're similar to taking a photograph. They form in a flash, often as if they were writing themselves. I don't typically edit these little poems at the time. If I am going to develop them or do any further editing or adjusting, that's usually going to come later. And so, as I say, I carry one of these books, and If something strikes me, such as 1st of August, I wrote, August again, cicadas shrill to be, to be, to be. And that's a snapshot. Now, I don't do much more with that than just that. I think that's, it's a little onomatopoeia there, right? It stands on its own.
So where did you write that, in the backyard?
Yeah, yeah. I heard a cicada, and it reminded me when I was a boy in Albany, New York, that we had them in our yard, and they would always start singing around the 1st of August. And so I associate them with the coming of August.
Can you share another one with us, Randy?
Yeah, this is a low tide poem. I found low tide is much more of has a much more poetic redolence than high tide because of what it reveals. And I've got one here that I wrote up in Southport, Maine, which is on the Booth Bay Peninsula. And they have pretty good tides up there. They're 12 to 15 feet in range. And on this particular day, I just happened to catch the dead low tide at a time when the moon must have been in a phase when the tide's range was even greater, because an awful lot was showing. And I just wrote this one. The sea is bearing her secrets today, strangely blonde and scented with mystery.
It's a good snapshot. I didn't realize they were so brief. They're almost just a little bit bigger than haikus.
Well, they're haiku-esque, yes. Haikus, of course, are poems of 17 syllables. I don't worry too much about whether they're 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 syllables. I just let the words come. I let the impression form and I write it. And then that's enough for me typically. But sometimes I will find that some of these poems will fit together into a larger piece of work. Can I give you an example of that?
Great.
Well, we were in Sicily last summer before last, and we were in an Airbnb in a lemon orchard. And it was dark, and I was looking out over the town of Avila, which is a seaside town in the east of Sicily. And these poems just started to come for me. And I just got poem after poem. It began with this: the breeze has dropped to a softness, like the whisper of one in a dream. And then
Yes.
moth wings beat rhapsodies of chaos in the lampshade. The cat starts from its sleep and stares. It's like, you've probably heard moths when they get trapped in a lampshade beating those rhapsodies of chaos.
Was the second snapshot also from that Sicily vacation?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
What was the second poem about the moths also from the Sicily vacation?
Yep. And then I went out and I sat out on the patio, and I could look down into the valley, and I got down in the valley. Jewel box trucks grind down through grunts of gears, scrubbing for gas and hamburger grease. G sounds.
You like that? You like that?
Yeah, I like it too. And then I got there was a switch engine and a freight yard down probably 2-3 miles down in the valley. And I wrote, the freight yard engine that's been stalking the tracks behind the orchard, back and forth, howls at last like a steel coyote.
Very, very good.
Okay, so and then I look up, and it's one of those waxing gibbous moons. It kind of looks like a football moon.
Yeah.
And I wrote, cows moo beneath the waxing gibbous moon.
More on here,
yeah. And all of these. So within a day or two, I started to put these together into a longer poem. And what I ended up with was a poem that incorporated all of these, but in a setting that became much more philosophical. I looked out on the city of Avila, and I had this sense that Avila was saying, I wrote, white points afloat in the blackness of autumn, the lights of Avila attest, we are one body, though many blink and will be gone. And then something else came to me, that what was going on in that city with those lights that I couldn't see and wasn't in, there's all kind of life going on. There was human life, there was birth, there was death going on. And so I finished the poem with the lines, and sighs arise and cries, great truths and lies, those endless streams of greetings and goodbyes. Avila, one fleeting ship of souls where someone's keeping watch as someone dies. So all of these pieces fit together into, and it became a bigger poem, which I had. And I think this is a point I would like to make, that I had no intention that night of writing a bigger poem. I just was experiencing these snapshot impressions. But as I kept letting them express themselves and getting them down on paper, something bigger was forming. The word symbol means that which is thrown together, symbola, to be thrown, bola, sim, together. A symbol is a new level of meaning that comes from putting together other pieces that in and of themselves don't carry that meaning. And I find sometimes by just putting together my snapshots, I will come up with something that feels like a more symbolic level of meaning, a deeper level of meaning than I had even been experiencing in that moment.
I think the idea of snapshots and then later combining them is very interesting. And I think that's part of the creative process that you mentioned earlier. I want to come back to the snapshots, but I want to mesh a couple of ideas that you had. You mentioned earlier you did a lot of counseling when you were active in the ministry. Have you ever used poetry as part of your counseling?
Not directly, no. But I have had people who have presented me with things they have written, poems of their own, diary entries, things that had a poetic redolence for them, which then became incorporated in the counseling. And I find that most people do have some art, whether it's writing or painting or they have some desire to express themselves creatively. I think it's innate in us as human beings. And it's really important that people have permission to do that, and also that they have a means for doing that. And one of the things I think the snapshot approach provides is a ready opportunity for people just simply to be creative in the moment. Thomas Merton says the experience of writing a poem is more important than the poem itself. And I think that that's oftentimes very therapeutic for people if they feel that they have permission not only to explore their own creativity, but to share it in a meaningful way. I look for those opportunities for myself and others. And that's actually how I got involved in the Poetry Salon up in Rockport.
I think you're right about everybody having a taste and desire for art. Even if they're not actively creating it. I've talked to students, and you've mentioned art to them, and some of the guys would say, what is that?
That's right. That's right.
And if you ask them to show you their car, they start talking about the color and the lines and then the beautiful sounds coming out of it, but don't call it art. So.
No, but it's their creativity. Yeah, it's their soul making, as John Keats took that Greek word for creativity, poiesis, which means to bring things together into a new formation or to bring something out of nothing. Poiesis, he said, that is soul making. And that gets back to what I was saying at the beginning, that if we're created in the image of a creator, then we ought to be plumbing the depths in our own lives of creativity, whatever that might be for us. And if it's a beautiful car, or if it's a poem or a painting, it doesn't really much matter. But I think a lot of people need help in accessing their creativity. And one of the things that I try to do is encourage people to be poets and to write poetry and to see it's easy enough. You don't have to write an opus. It doesn't have to be a 5-page magnum opus of some kind. It can just be a snapshot, and maybe they'll fit together in some meaningfully new way, or maybe not. But you need to understand about poetry that it is something that all ages can do. It's something that everyone can do, whether or not they are particularly literary, or even if they don't feel they're a good writer, they can still do it. And I think in doing it, that there's a real experience that people find therapeutic and also connected with others.
A couple of minutes ago, Rand, you mentioned, as I did in the introduction, the salon work you've been doing in Rockport. Can you tell us something about that? Where did the idea come from? How long has it been going? And what are the mechanics of putting that together?
Well, the salon has had 4 years of experience. It's at the Windhover Performing Arts Center in Rockport. Windhover is named after a poem by a great Irish poet named Gerard Manley Hopkins, The Windhover. It's a campus that mentors people in the art of modern dance. It was founded by a wonderful choreographer named Ina Hahn, who was also a poet. And Ina and I actually first connected around a poem she had written about the Spanish poet Lorca. And she liked the way I read it. When she showed it to me, I read it aloud to her, and she could hear it, and she liked that. And so we began a bit of a poetic exchange. I would send her some of my poetry, and she would send me some of hers. Ina died 4.5 years ago. And in her memory, and to perpetuate the spirit of poesis, not just through dance, but also through poetry, I approached her daughter, Lisa, who's now the director at the Windhover Performing Arts campus there, and said, why don't we have an annual gathering of people who would like to share poems, either poems they've written or poems that they love. But let's spend a couple, 3 hours together in the spirit of poetry. And Lisa liked the idea. And so our first one, I think we had 12 people, many of them already connected to Windhover. And we spent about 2 hours, each person with about 10 minutes of time to share their poetry. That's 2 hours if 12 people do 10 minutes worth. And it was a great experience. So we decided to have it a second year and a third year. This past year was a very unusual one. What with the pandemic, we had to do it on Zoom. But what that did was it allowed people from other parts of the country to participate. So we literally had a coast-to-coast participation.
I participated in that one, and I spoke with some people from San Diego, my birthplace. So that was interesting for me.
Yeah, and you read your poem, The Five Goodbyes, from your recent book, the Taking the Train of Singularities South from Midtown, right? Yeah. Very interesting poem that you shared as part of the salon. So we hope to keep doing it. I think that it's, we had a few more people this year. 15 is about an upper limit for the amount of time that we have to take of a 2 to 3 hour period, and especially if you want to have a little break and maybe some refreshments and all. But I love the idea of it.
You're definitely going to continue the salon. Will you continue to have a Zoom branch, or will it only be live if?
Have to see next May, John. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that we know where we'll be next May with any of this, but hopefully it'll be in person again.
Is that the scheduled time, May?
We've been doing it the last weekend in May, either on or right after the Memorial Day holiday. And as I say, there's been a steady attendance of 12 to 15. Last year we had 17 with the extra people that were Zooming in. And somebody suggested maybe doing it as a hybrid, that we might possibly be able to incorporate our remote guests on Zoom as part of the salon. That would be something to explore.
Were you an expert in Zoom before this year?
Nor am I now.
Yes,
Nor am I now. No, I'm not. But I find that it's a tool that it's not something that I would have thought I would have appreciated as much as I have come to. We use it for our church services. We use it for things like this. We use it for poetry salons. We use it just for, discussions with friends and colleagues. So yeah, I found it to be a very useful, but I'm not a particularly technical person.
It's a fairly straightforward procedure. It's much more, all of this media stuff is much more user-friendly than 20 years ago, the dark ages of DOS.
Well, we wouldn't be doing it 20 years ago, or even probably 5 or 10. So I think we're fortunate that we have this tool in the midst of the pandemic.
Right, right. I want to go back to your snapshots again, the poetry, and ask you if first, before you read another, if the snapshots have been put into a book along with other salon material.
I am working on that. I've had other projects since May, and I am preparing a Windover Poetry Salon chapbook that will be mailed out this fall to the participants from last May, yes. Whether there's going to be any further publication, I know that at Windover events, sometimes material like that would be distributed to those that attend the dance events there. They have some wonderful dance events. They actually have an annual event called Quarry Dance there, where they use the Rockport quarries for modern dance, both on land and in the water. And that can draw several hundred people. So I'm thinking perhaps we'll put the chapbook out there as either a handout or something available for people to buy on a yearly basis. This is the first time we've gone in that direction.
I'll be looking forward to that.
You'll be getting one.
Can you share another one or two of the snapshots and some of the background about where you wrote that particular poem?
Well, I tell you, one of the other approaches I've found has been fruitful for me in writing poetry has been when I attend a concert and when the music begins to really get into my psyche, and I follow the movement of the music. I watch for imagery that the music creates for me. As that imagery arises, I get in touch with the feelings it's generating. And then I, again, simply let the words find themselves. These books are invaluable because you can write even in the dark. I've got some poems I wrote in pretty dark circumstances in concerts. And I discover that as I write, I sometimes discover what I am writing, in a sense, as I follow the music. And there's plenty of time afterwards for polishing, but in the flow of the concert, I don't edit very much. So here's one I thought I'd share, a brief one on a Chopin concert. And it goes like this. Hearthlight through the window of a Polish evening, a beacon of gold to a passerby. But soon the road will grow dark again, a vaporous frost rising beyond the bend, and the night witch riding the gusts of November. Even the crackling branches will be cackling, shaking loose the stars.
So the Chopin, the art is a little...
This piece moved from that window of gold to some pretty dark feeling places, yes.
Yes.
And I followed it. I had no idea when I started writing the poem where we were going.
I like the stars being shaken out, yes.
Yeah, if you've been out in the winter time and you look up at bare branches and the breeze or the wind, it's almost like they're shaking loose the stars. And that image just came to me. It reminded me of some time I had been on a road like that in the middle of winter and had that feeling that the stars were shaking loose. But the music led me there. And it led me there line by line, probably over the space of maybe 20 minutes of music that poem wrote itself.
The stars never seem sharper than in the winter. I'm sure that's an illusion, just because you're cold and you've got to focus because you're not going to be there too long. Perhaps.
That's it. That's it. You're moving on, and Chopin is, particularly his music does move you along. So I pictured myself as leaving this warm town center and going into this dark woodland, and that's where the music seemed to be taking me. And it felt like the wind was blowing in a November, December kind of way. The one edit I did was, my original version was I had the branches cackling. I had even the cackling branches will be crackling, but it seemed to me that, that it was better the other way around.
Yeah.
I am also, one other place that I find that poetry comes to me is on plains. And what I shared at the Windover Salon was actually work that I had written in several cases on plains. There's something liminal about being on a plane, and something also that is physically confined, and that suppresses normalcy. I don't know, it seems to spur me to write poetry. Those lines that I write on planes may come as snapshots, or they may follow a theme. And this one, if I could share one more poem, I think we have time. This one's called Homeward Bound, and I wrote it last October. We were returning from Venice on one of those flights that took off about an hour before sunset in Europe, and it just went all the way across the Atlantic with the sun chasing us. Of course, we were going 600 miles an hour and the sun was going 1,000, so it was going to catch us. But it seemed to take forever. It was the longest twilight, I think, that I ever had experienced. And I wrote this as I looked out the window. Fleeing the edge of night westward across the Atlantic, we are a bright bird still in the evening over Labrador. Arrays of endless clouds tinted in sitar colors, pink and ecstatic, with a tabla moon keeping the beat. This longest raga of my life strikes chords of clotting cream all the way to America, as if the black wash of the Terminator will never quite gobble us up. As if, she says, her fingers a ghost brushing my arm. As if, I say.
That Terminator is always a problem. The Terminator, whether it's Arnold Schwarzenegger or the big Terminator after all of us. Rand,
Terminator.
we're really out of time now. I want to thank you for being a guest on the Writer's Block. I've enjoyed the half hour, and I know our audience will. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's been so much fun. I can't believe it's been a half hour, John.
Now I'm going to close the show to our TV audience. Thank you for being with us on the Writer's Block this evening. If you've learned something about poetry from Rand Peabody, then the Writer's Block has done its job. I know we'll see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.